and I'm delighted to welcome to the Googleplex author, physician, doctor of soul, and a modern-day guru of human empowerment, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Dr. Chopra began his life as a physician, a doctor of the body, but very soon he realized that his true calling was in being a doctor of the spirit. In fact, his versatility is clear from the fact that he's a member of the American College of Physicians, he's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, and a scientist at the Gallup organization. And as soon as he realized this shift in how he wanted to touch people, he started speaking and writing about it, and so prolific that he's written 55 books, 18 of them on the New York Times bestseller list, on a variety of topics on mind, body, spirituality, health, human empowerment. And along the way, and check this out when you get your phones, he's created an Android app called Authentic Yoga, which you should all give it a try. And here to speak about his latest book, The Soul of Leadership, which you should all have copies for, I want you to join me in giving a warm namaste to Deepak Chopra, somebody Time magazine called one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century, the poet, prophet of alternate medicine. Please join me with a warm namaste to Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So thank you very much for having me, and I have enjoyed the last 1 hour walking around this campus, being exposed to the spirit of this place, and I can authentically say that Google has a soul. There are a lot of places that have no soul whatsoever. So very happy to be here. How many of you actually ever think about the soul? How many of you don't think there is such a thing? Go ahead. Just 2? Okay. Let me start with a little story, and then we'll get into, addressing the topic of today. The story goes back when I was about 7 years of age. In India. My father was an army doctor. My little brother at that time was about 4 years of age. My mother was the best mother in the world. And we read in the newspapers, we were living in a small town, then small town, in the center of India called Jabalpur. And the newspaper said that Mr. Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India, and the heir to Mahatma Gandhi, was coming to our little town. This, remember, about 15 years post-independence, to open an automobile factory. Nehru was a great hero for Indians at that time, a visionary, a statesman, as I said, the spiritual heir to Mahatma Gandhi. So there was a lot of excitement, and in our family there was only one discussion over breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was what was the color of the sari my mother would wear for the occasion. And my father would, of course, tease her and say that no one was going to notice the color of a sari. So on the day Mr. Nehru arrived, my mother in a beautiful pink sari, and my father in his army uniform with his World War II medals, my little brother, then 4, now the dean of Harvard Medical School, and me, we were on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning before the sun rose. And by about 6:37, there were millions of people on the street. And in India, when I say millions, it means millions, okay? It doesn't mean thousands or tens of thousands, it means millions. Seething masses of humanity. Wherever you could see, there were people. People on treetops, people hanging by window ledges, people on buses, people on each other's shoulders, rambunctious, rowdy, and really very noisy. And about 9 o'clock, Mr. Nehru's motorcade came by our street. He was standing in a jeep, wearing a white Nehru jacket, as we now call it. This is a Nehru jacket. And he had a rose, a red rose, in his lapel, which was his signature, his trademark. And there was a jeep in the front, and there was a jeep in the back, a motorcycle or two. Pretty simple. And it slowly turned the corner and came by us. And as it went by us, Mr. Nehru seemed to turn around, look at my mother, and he took his rose out and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped and stepped back almost, except for my mother, who kind of stepped forward like a queen, picked up the rose, held it up to great applause, and looked at my father and said, "Daddy, what did I tell you?" Okay. And now let's go home. So in that moment, as a 7-year-old, I kind of thought, boy, she's a great leader. You know, the real leader in the family. Although my father wore the medals and all that. We went home, and she emptied one room, completely took away all the furniture except for one table. And on the table, she put a vase and the rose. And for the next 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. It was quite something. They would come in India, you know, when you go to a house of veneration or a sacred place, you take off your shoes, etc. So they would come and take their shoes off and tiptoe into this room in silence, and they would just look at the rose. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade, and my mother had a party. She invited all her friends, and at the end of the party, everybody got a faded rose petal. And you should have seen the attitude when they accepted that. It was like they were getting a diamond or a jewel. So afterwards, we asked our mother, my brother and I, what was so special about those rose petals? And she said something, you know, some things you remember forever, that became the genesis of this course that I now teach at the Kellogg School of Management, called The Soul of Leadership. She said those rose petals was symbolic of the soul of India. And at that time, I didn't really understand what that meant, the soul of a country. As I mentioned to you, when I came here, I felt that Google has a soul. When I go to Detroit, I don't feel that. You know, there's something very special when you think of soul, and I'll tell you what that means. But my mother explained that the leaders, in a sense, are the symbolic soul of a group consciousness, that they represent the dreams and the creativity and the longings and the aspirations and the intentions of a collective consciousness. And that collective consciousness could be a small unit, a family. It could be a company, business. It could be a community. It could be a country. It could be a political party. It could be the whole world. But the leader somehow embodies the collective dream. And so when somebody like a Martin Luther King Jr. says, "I have a dream," obviously he's not speaking of a personal dream alone. It's the dream of a great zeitgeist, of an emerging longing for transition, for transformation, for change, for movement into a higher consciousness. So that kind of stayed with me as a theme, you know, that the soul represents a deep aspect of our core consciousness. Later, I went on to study medicine, and like anyone else, being programmed, indoctrinated into a completely materialistic worldview, I really became, like most of my colleagues, a great technician who knew everything about the human body, and not necessarily a healer, because I knew nothing about the other aspects of human consciousness. So I used to wonder why you could have two groups of patients or two patients who had the same illness, the same treatment, the same physician, and yet have completely different outcomes. That's well known in medicine. So even though we know so much about biological systems as organisms that follow the laws of chemistry and physics and mathematics, if you will, there's something very unpredictable about human biology and its response to illness. So later I started to train in a field called endocrinology. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, it's the study of hormones, and then transferred to the field of neuroendocrinology, which is brain chemistry. And when I was in my training, this was a very interesting time, because for the first time as biologists, we were addressing the unsolved mystery of consciousness. You know, we're all conscious beings. We're sitting here listening to each other. Our consciousness is responsible for our perception and for our thinking and for our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and our longings and aspirations, our memories. And nobody as yet has figured out the mechanics of consciousness. It's the one totally unsolved mystery in biology. When I was in medical school, we had a very simple notion of consciousness. The human brain, or the brain, produces consciousness. Just like your gallbladder produces bile, and your pancreas produces pancreatic juice, and your stomach makes acid, your brain makes thoughts. So if you have thoughts and feelings and emotions and imagination, it's the dance of molecules. But actually, the more we understand about the human brain, or the brain in general, the deeper the mystery of consciousness gets. For example, your brain is actually more or less like a network of synaptic layers of tracks that have firings, electrical firings. So right now, if I asked you to imagine a sunset, can you see one? But there's no picture of a sunset in your brain. If I go to your brain, all I'll see is some electricity, that's all. Or if I ask you to imagine a sound, or ask you to remember something, I won't see any images or sounds or textures in the brain. All we see is neural networks that fire electricity. Similarly, we have no idea what causes perception. For example, when you see this color, what color is this? Red, right? And yet there's no red beam of light coming from here to your eyes. Some invisible electromagnetic radiation with a particular frequency that has no color. It hits your retina. It causes generation of electricity, which goes to your brain. And in your brain, there's no red color, and you see red. So where is the red? This, in science, in biology, is called the hard problem of consciousness. There's a soft problem which has been solved, which means for every mental activity, there is a corresponding neural correlate. So if I tell you to imagine a sunset, I'll see which part of the brain acts up. There's no part of the brain that does not represent some kind of mental activity. But how we experience sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, how we imagine, how we think, what is the mechanics of insight or intuition or creativity,